Hi, I'm Drew Pedrick, founder and principal of McTigue Architecture, design studio in Los Angeles. We focus on what I call conscious architecture, which is a way of putting society and the environment first as we make our decisions and work with our clients to create place for people and planet. And today I have the wonderful pleasure and honor of having Michela Abrams with me as my guest. Michela is the founder of MOCA Plus, I think I'm saying that correctly, design and management advisory practice. Her focus is on what is good and possible, and it's shaped her work with companies like Ziff-Davis, Business 2.0, and Dwell, where she's created brand credibility, awareness, and value for millions of consumers. She's also the Chief Advancement Officer for US Modernist, an award-winning organization that raises awareness about modernist architecture and design. And that's how we met. I had the great pleasure of spending time with Michela and speaking with her and the US Modernist leadership team at Modernism Week in Palm Springs some time ago. And today we get to extend that conversation with some time together and some questions that I have for her. So welcome, Michela. So glad to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, Drew.
Very welcome. Great. You have a quote on your website that I love. It's from Bruce Mao, and I'd like to read it. For better or worse, everything is connected, which is why everything matters. And I wonder if you could just tell me what strikes you with that.
Yeah, so the reason that has been such an important and really guiding principle for me for a long time, even previous to MOCA Plus when I was CEO of Dwell, is that what I always found is that people thought that architecture and design was all about aesthetics. The first reaction was, well, what style was that? What color was it? And immediately people are drawn to that and not realizing really, and understandably, because if they weren't educated in architecture and design or weren't around it in their environment, then that's kind of the lowest common denominator about design, right? Is what does it look like? Mm-hmm. But the connectedness of everything in our world, from as large a scope as you'd like to think about, all the way down to a room in which we may be speaking today, mm-hmm. Everything matters, right? The color and the textures and the light and all that are not unimportant, but they're all inextricably linked to everything else about the room, the dwelling, the neighborhood, the city, and so forth. So I like it so much because it is a constant reminder to me that when somebody says, well, I can't worry about the water issues. It's too big. I'm powerless. I can't worry about, climate change or, global warming, whatever they're willing to accept, because that's bigger than I am. It's not realizing what that really means to everything else in our lives. So
fantastic.
If everybody just understood this principle, that everything matters, I think that there would be a more conscious world around design and understanding that, well, what pleases the eye, of course, is important, mm-hmm. right? But the rest of our senses are always engaged. Exactly. And so at the very basic level, this is all connected too, right? So
that's fantastic.
That's what it means to me. And that is what I really bring to our clients is that thinking and that discussion, whether it's the brand or what we're doing to launch or spin off or sell, that all these things matter.
Mm-hmm. So true. It's it informs every bit of the process that I've come to after 41 years in the architecture business, that we all do our step. We talk about sustainability, we talk about the environment in terms of what we can do, think globally, act locally. Those kinds of thoughts are so true, because really what they refer to is that what you're saying, which is that the little step that I take, and you and a billion other people take, is how we make a difference, is how we make change, is how we find improvements, and hopefully thrive on this planet, which we need to start doing more of.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have, I was going to ask you, I want to ask you a couple of different ways, but starting with, what are the connection points that you find between the work you're doing and specifically with MOCA Plus and with the US Modernist? But you have a very full plate, so I'm picking those two out of.
Okay. So I have known George Smart, the CEO of USModernist.org, for, I really think, since the founding 15 years ago. Very early on, Dwell named George a nice modernist, which we did every year. And it was really to call out unsung heroes of design and modernism that were really just trying to make sure that everyone was aware of architecture and design from another time and what could we learn from it. So I followed George. We became friends. And a couple of years ago, I had breakfast with him and said, okay, George, you're not going to do this all on your own. You know, what are you going to do about the organization? And we set kind of in motion over this omelet what he could do. And then he came to me 6 months ago and said, you know, that breakfast, well, I'm going to do it, but you have to help me. So what, of course, made complete sense to me is this is very much in line with the clients that MOCA Plus has. We help people realize the power of their brand, the community that they should be addressing if they're not, or at least in the quantity that they may not be at present. What's so important about the work is this is the largest archive of modernist articles from journals from the last century, magazines and journals. Over 5 million pages, Drew, he has amassed. So when you go to USModernist.org, you're able to pull up almost any house, pull up a neighborhood, pull up an architect.
It's astounding. I've done that with George, and he zeroed me in on a map and said, here are 5 homes by this architect.
Exactly. It's wonderful, wonderful work. And so our goal is to make sure that everyone's aware of this, that it exists. What we want to do is take it further and be really about preservation, because we are losing still in 2022. We are still losing iconic homes, the last of which in international tragedy, in my opinion, was the Geller one, Marcel Breuer, mowed down. And the people only spent $974,000 for it, said they weren't doing it, and literally mowed it down to the ground. And the city's response, and the city's response is, it's their property. So it really put us into action, saying the archive is so important for awareness. We need to talk more about it. We need to advertise it. We need to do a much better job in communications around the country, at least, so that people understand what's available and start protecting these homes before they're in serious danger and or complete peril, as Geller one. So it's in perfect harmony with everything else I do at MOCA Plus. It's making sure that we're communicating everything about the assets of US Modernists and reaching everyone we possibly can. And you don't have to live in a modern home. You don't have to be self-declared modernist, or the other thing, very naturally, kind of like design and the aesthetics I was talking about. Today, one says modernism and everybody conjures up what? Mid-century, right? And just assumes that everything is about that. And of course, as you well know, Drew, modernism started long before that, even in this country. So it's really this terrific challenge that we have to raise money to sustain the organization and have full-time archivists, and make sure that our role in awareness and preservation is indelible and demonstrable. So we can say, here are the homes we've saved, which we can do in North Carolina right now, but the goal is doing it around the country.
Yeah. Well, you had me thinking about a lot of things just there. One of which was the language we use around many things. And in architecture, we use language around time period and style, and the concept of modernism, what that means, as you said earlier, spans, well, the core of it really spans 80 to 100 years. But that's when we call it modernism, right? That's when we refer to it as a thing. And I wonder if you could speak for a minute about, on the one hand, what is most urgent about architecture and design in general? What is most urgent, let's say, about modernism? And I think you just described that, the issue of preserving it.
Right.
And how does that all relate if we take the language aside a little bit?
Drew, this is something I could spend hours on, because I think it's really sad that the work of the Schindlers of the last century, specifically in the 1920s, and Neutra and Eichler and the long tail, right, of all of them, were specifically trying to show with their work the simplicity of modern, and therefore the ability for it still to be great design, but be affordable. Houses for the masses, right? That was really the dream.
It was.
And each of them pretty much failed, because at each period in our history, from World War I to then II, and keep going, through the wars and the post-war era, it's almost as if we put them in this bubble of a conversation that was somehow esoteric and only meant for the intelligentsia, or something that was around a professorial lecture, rather than what are the basic principles they were just trying to share with us that we can use now that we were welcoming home tens of thousands of veterans after the war.
Yes.
And so we didn't. As we all know, we created a huge unsustainable suburbia in the 60s, that homes that did not last even 30 years, most of them. Sure. In the county of Los Angeles, my favorite megalopolis, the San Fernando Valley was really born in terms of that in the 60s. And you could just drive around and understand that nothing was taken from the modernist principles, right? Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter is, it's not that much different today. It is not that much different. We accept that we have a serious housing crisis in this country, in every state. We have the ADU solution. We have other ways in different states with legislation to help this. But what I really hope happens is that we are able to democratize the whole discussion of architecture and design in whatever way we need to make it understood, and the import of it, that it's not just how we live in that moment. It is our legacy. It's how we think about how the future is going to live. So the next generation that we should feel some responsibility for. So what are we building around that? How do we think about our neighborhoods and our communities? And I don't think we do enough of that. One work that I will point to is the Los Angeles AIA has formed a completely separate organization called ACLA, Architecture and Communities Los Angeles. So, and it's in the Adams corridor, specifically to demystify architecture, to humanize it, to explain that it isn't for the 1%, that it is just about good design and the dignity that comes with living in good design. So as we start solving this housing crisis, ever so slowly, but surely, hopefully what we do is imbue these principles of the last 100 years of dozens and dozens and dozens of architects around the country who understood good design and architectural principles that would yield really beautifully designed homes that everybody could afford.
It's that wow, wonderful. I'm so glad we're recording this because that's so beautifully said, Michela. The concepts that you're pointing to feel to me very much like they are primarily about the social concerns that we tend to lose sight of. We tend to misaddress. We tend to misappropriate our priorities, and end up far too often looking at the economics of just about everything. And I'm not trying to take a political turn here, but I really think that that the concept of creating something which actually, in the post-World War II era with mid-century modernism, the attempt really was a social attempt, right? It was a social conversation about mass producing, about affordable housing, about beauty for everyone, all that. And we've really lost sight of that.
We have
permanently. I think we still have it in us. I hope we do.
I think we do.
How we get back there.
Well, Drew, I think that the more, and this might be a great thing about social media for all of the knocks on it, that we have a way to make the content around this discussion interesting, simple, achievable, fun. There are so many ways to engage everybody in this conversation and make everyone feel a part of the place they live, the legacy they will leave with the place, and not that, again, this thought that there are these people, you architects, the mad scientists behind these buildings, and they're really only for the towers and then for the very rich. Now, I do think we've certainly made progress there, but we have a lot more to go. And to your point, the whole idea of how architecture and design informs our behaviors as, again, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a city, and on out, is really important. Here's just another example. COVID, a silver lining of that might be that many, many people and dozens, if not hundreds of companies have realized that their employees do not have to come back to work in the way in which they did prior to this pandemic. That they thought for sure there would be a degradation of team spirit and work and diluting of a philosophy of the mission and vision of the brand and all these things if you didn't have everybody walking through that door every morning and out every night. And look what we found. It went on long enough to find, well, actually, it's not happening. We have people living where they can afford to live, in the place they would like to live, doing the job they would like to have, and actually being able to contribute probably way more hours, is the truth, than they did when they were in the office. So what does that result in? Here's going back to the connectedness, is that you've got massive numbers of office buildings that are empty.
Yes.
Or at least floors, right? Millions of square feet empty. Let's just take the city of San Francisco, who, no secret to everybody or anybody, is in the worst shape I've ever seen it. And my grandfather arrived in the city right after the earthquake in 1906. It's tragic. I mean, it's filthy. It's filled with homeless. It is, it's not a nice place anymore. Sadly, not the place I grew up in and remember. Now, here's where the housing shortage comes in. Even in that city, the mayor would like 50,000 new homes, right? New micro units. In other words, shelter in places of, again, presumably of dignity. Why aren't we talking about an adaptive reuse plan over time? Why aren't we working with the developers of these buildings to talk about what might this look like in 2025 or 2030? What can we do to help reshape the cityscape and be able to help create the culture of inclusivity and housing and use the buildings that we have instead of trying to figure out where do we find more land to go build new construction. And I'm not saying all new is bad or that they shouldn't be considering new, but I have not heard of or read anything in the news about any discussion that city government or the state even is having with these large developers about the square footage that is not ever probably going to be reabsorbed as it was. So why aren't we doing that? And,
yeah.
and there are many other
examples. There are examples, and very few. There are examples. Maybe, every city may be very different, and I'm not sure about San Francisco myself. There are some examples in LA where we're seeing the conversion conversation going on. We're seeing that that designs are getting into the agencies to be approved. We're seeing that developers and owners are willing to talk about it because, as you pointed out, they're faced with these horrible facts, these raw truths, which is that their buildings are sitting 30% or 10% occupied.
Right.
We have 3 clients right now who will only use between 20 and 35% of their space. And so what do you do with the rest? And that's the conversation. Well, if you're a high-rise building, well, then it's very easy to consolidate and say, well, then okay, let's look at a strategy. And I think the bigger question you're also pointing to is, perhaps there's an obligation that we all have with what we create, which is some of our mission too. When we design something, our goal with a client is that this will be designed in a way that it could become something for the next person, whatever it may be, but it also could become something else for someone else down the road, right? So if we're all willing to put all the energy into designing and constructing using the materials and people's time and energy to make it, then shouldn't we be obligated to see that it could become something else if it needs to, if we need it?
Yeah. I mean, as you were talking, I thought of a great example. I mean, look what New York has done with Hudson Yards. Look what they've done with the High Line and meatpacking and that whole neighborhood, which now isn't affordable. People used to think, oh, I'm not living there. And now I'm not living there because I don't think I can afford to live there.
That's right.
But that is a phenomenal example of a recreation because of architecture and design being for our time at its best, right? Mm-hmm. That they've created a whole new way in which the community experiences that place. And people who don't live there still go there just to walk that High Line and be able to experience New York in a way that you couldn't prior to that and see what it was. And so the interesting storytelling, even behind that and what was on that line before this happened. So I think New York is a great example of a city who has worked very hard to do that type of reuse.
Very dear to my heart, as you know, coming from a family in New York, my dad took what they called the L to high school, to Fordham High School every day, and he said that was my routine. I left home and I was a kid. I got on the train, and of course when I lived in New York for a while. It was rusted out, and then they started to talk about whether they take it down, as we see cities are removing some of that infrastructure, but really short of removing it, we can actually think of other things like the High Line. And,
right.
We used to call the East Coast, when I lived there anyway, the Rust Belt, which had some significance then as something unique. The old architecture of the East Coast, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and all that. Well, it's not the Rust Belt anymore.
No.
All across the U.S., really, we're facing these old infrastructures. We've seen it with water quality in the Midwest, lead in pipes. We see it in L.A. where our power goes off every now and
right.
again.
I'm afraid that California is going to be the Dust Belt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Here we go, sliding into another horrible drought. And what did we do for the 5 years when we had all that water? Anything else about storage? No. So I could go on about that too, but that's
it begs my next question for you, which on my list here, which is we sort of are talking about already. But what do you think the future of design and architecture looks like to you? If you take the optimist view, let's say, because I know you're a very optimistic person.
Well, I have great faith that modern architecture and design will win the day. And that means that people will understand that it's okay to have this longing for their cultural history, right? I'm half Italian, half Irish. Mm-hmm. Not much about Irish architecture that I need to recreate. But as we see in many places in California, the Italianate, what I call the Spanish-Iranians affectionately, lot line to lot line, that is that owner's, homage to that architectural history. I think that is changing. I think we all see that changing slowly but surely, and that we can preserve great architecture. We can have a longing for the pieces of that architecture, what makes us nostalgic for that, and incorporate it into design that's appropriate for our time. At Dwell, the founder actually had a quote that said that we owe it to ourselves as a culture to have an architecture for our time, one that is distinctly optimistic and one that connects people with their place. And that that is modernism, right? Yes. At the very base level, that is modern. It's not glass and steel and concrete, and some of it is, but it is so much more important than that. It's really a philosophy of the way we live. So I believe that we are going to solve the housing issue using modern design principles, because I think there are enough people and enough organizations who are standing up to say, we can't do what we did last century and have these brilliant minds build these beautiful examples of the architecture they were trying to show that everybody could have, and walk away again and have things that just can't be part of the earth anymore. So I have great hope, actually, and optimism around that. Without getting political, I think that we need everybody at the city, state, and federal level to take some courses in the very basic principles of architecture and design. Just the most basic, not a master's degree, not an executive MBA, just some basic understanding about what it is we do as a society when we are creating good architecture. What does that really mean? What does it mean to our legacy? What does it mean to the funding that we give it? And I guess lastly, the thing that I hope is that for marginalized communities who the government's answer since 1964 has been to spend $33 trillion on housing developments that nobody owns. You get a number in a lottery and you're given an address. What kind of integrity do you think that imbues in somebody about the place they live? Zero. So my hope is that we understand that as a colossal use, poor use of money, and that we really double down and realize that everybody needs to be able to live in a home, right? And understand what it takes to do that. That yes, there has to be income, that yes, there has to be an assistance program in order to get them into the place of home ownership. And it's going to have a very different look, obviously, than what we have now, in order to solve the problem at a macro level. But I do think we can. But to do that, it's not just going to be the will of the private sector, which I do believe is going to be more powerful and more important than the government, but it is still going to be a public-private partnership that truly solves the problem. It's going to have to be. So we need to educate the legislators at a very basic level about what these things mean, because they have no idea when they rule on these things, the consequences.
I love it. That's so true. And I love your belief that essentially, if you're in the political world, you need to have training in the physical world. You have to study architecture and things like that, because we can't. Society doesn't exist without place, right? We have to have place. we figured that out, eons ago. Place doesn't exist without society. There's no place if people aren't creating it. But the planet, and I always like to say people, place, and planet, but the planet will exist regardless, right? The planet doesn't need us. We need the planet. We need how we create place on this planet, how we work together. What are those connecting points? What is an integrative approach, as well as an iterative approach, and to think of it not from an economics first perspective, but as you're saying, from we have to come up with new ways and new systems of materials, new ways to build a building. Someone said, if you take a builder from 1802 and put them on a project site today, 2022, and they'll start working right away because nothing's changed, right? How we build a house is the same we were doing, 220 years ago. So these are things where we have to shape the future and to use the kind of thinking that you're promoting.
Well, and to value architecture and design and education at a higher level than we do. At last count, but I haven't gotten the data since 2016, only 5% of the homes in this country, unless it's in a planned development, were built with an architect.
Yes. It's incredible.
So, we have to change that. So part of that is having the architect, who very much, and obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, is an artist. 90% of architecture firms have fewer than 12 employees. Mm-hmm. So be able to do this groundwork, if you will, on going beyond the client and making sure that you are a part of the community discussion at every level, from the planning commission meetings to the city councils to the architectural organizations. I think that's how we slowly but surely will make this change. And that will be our legacy, because this change we're talking about and the housing that we need, that's going to take a couple decades at the very least to do this and do it well. So as far as I'm concerned, this is about planning for our legacy.
And a true commitment, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Michela, thank you so much. I have one kind of maybe personal side question for you, given all that you're doing, where you are right now, and your outlook is wonderful and far-reaching. So here's it's a sort of theoretical question. And that's, do you imagine yourself hiking in the woods, swimming in a stream, or are you standing at a lookout, or somewhere else in terms of where you are in your life right now? Tricky question.
You didn't tell me this was going to be existential.
I'm sorry, but I didn't give you the heads up on that. Answer it any way you want.
Standing on a lookout. And that really is the metaphor for where I am in my life right now, in loving my work and my clients and my nonprofit work. So that's how I feel pretty much every day, that I'm looking at all the possibilities. And what can I do to bring those possibilities to the people with whom I'm already working? And what can I do just personally each day to nourish my own soul and keep up the energy and the curiosity and the excitement?
Well, thank you. And thank you for what you do, because I think we all benefit, frankly. We all benefit from your vision and having a vision. So the outlook is the right. I'm glad you said that, because
Right.
That's how
Thank
I see
you.
it for you too. You have a wonderful vision, and I really appreciate this time we've had together today. I look forward to much more. And
Wonderful, Drew. Thank you so
take
much.
care of yourself. Keep doing great work.
I will. Thank you. And you also. Thanks you very much. All righty.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for watching. If you found it enlightening and interesting, then please like the video with your thumbs up. Please also subscribe to the channel to be notified of future episodes.